About enough to read a short story. Hi, I'm Philbin, and I like doing optional side quests. Early this year, I decided to take a French class at my local community college. Technically, French is my second language. However, I have no experience speaking it, and I was in desperate need of a boost to my GPA. One of the funny things about college, especially community college, is that your class is no longer around the same age as you. Now it can range from an early college high school student to a guy that I'm half sure is his grandfather. And after making fun of a classmate for getting a Spanish and French word mixed up, I realized, oh shit, we're only 4 months apart. I also realized that I learned every language that I know before I even started high school. So I started to ponder how much harder it would be to learn a new language now that my brain is fully developed. And I decided that in the next 3 years, I'm going to attempt to learn 3 new languages. And the first language on the list is the one that should theoretically be the easiest: Deutsch. Let me be clear. My intention is to become fluent in this language, and that is not going to happen in 1 month. The reason I am documenting the first month is simply to compare my progress with the other 2 languages. Again, since this is a European language, it should be the one with the fastest start. But how do we start? Let's talk about Duolingo. Not because I think it's good, but because it's mandatory. I've actually used Duolingo before when I was trying to learn Portuguese. Then I had a full conversation with a Brazilian man using only Spanish, and I realized that entire language is fake. I don't think Duolingo is as bad as people say. And I think I get why people are obsessed with learning languages on here. This thing is a dopamine fountain. Every time you get a question right, you hear a little, and then the character does a little animation. I think the biggest problem with Duolingo is in the way that it's marketed. You can't learn a new language by just doing 5-minute lessons every day. You need to be exposing yourself to that language for multiple hours daily. This actually isn't as hard as it sounds. It doesn't mean that you have to study for multiple hours. You can do this by just listening to a podcast in that language while you clean or cook, or by listening to music while you drive, even by changing the language of a game that you play frequently. And that's basically what I did. The whole point of this is just to get your brain used to listening to and processing other languages. I recommend using a true crime podcast. It's a little morbid, but they usually include time, places, dates, and adjectives. All the basic stuff. In total, I listened to about 2 hours of German content every day for the first week, including a couple lines of reading while playing video games. On top of this, I spent like 30 minutes every day studying with flashcards. You can use Duolingo for this, but I would recommend using Anki if you have access to a computer. Or you could also listen to some lessons on YouTube. By the end of the first week, I knew about enough to understand basic phrases. Progress was moving slower than I expected, but it was moving. I think that one of the reasons for that was that the flashcard deck that I chose for Anki was way too easy. One of the reasons that I recommend Anki over Duolingo is that you have a lot more freedom over how you learn. There were some flashcards on here that came from the Gothi, Gaethje,
Goethe
Institute, which I'm pretty sure is the main organization responsible for promoting German language across the world. So I downloaded those, but I also downloaded this deck and started with this deck because I had pictures. Yes, I am a grown man. It wasn't until I finished this deck and moved over to the
Goethe
flashcards that I realized how easy this was. But I don't regret it. I think it was a really good first step and I actually had fun getting through it.
Brother, I haven't even learned how to order food yet. Calm down. Why am I being taught how to get rejected already? Also, she was mad at you 2 slides ago, bro. Why did you shoot?
But the second week made me find something within myself that I didn't know I still had. Sympathy for the French language. After studying with flashcards, I would write down sentences using the words that I've learned so far. I started thinking that I could probably communicate with someone if I had to. No, I can't. The first week had me believing that this was just spicy English, and the second week made me realize that this was a language straight out of Middle-earth. I mean, just look at this thing. What Lovecraftian horror am I summoning with this? I got hit with the Dunning-Kruger effect pretty hard, but I got my confidence back a few days later. It turns out that the institute responsible for teaching German across the world actually knows what it's doing.
Ihre Eltern leben nicht mehr.
Their parents don't live near. How often am I gonna have to say this? There's a lot of problems with this world. We care about our worlds in Germany.
You need a hug? Let me give you a hug, bro.
At the end of the second week, I went out and got this book, and to my surprise, I actually got through the first page just fine. This is where how you learn a language changes and starts to get easier. At some point, you want to start learning the same way you learned your first language after the age of 10, subconsciously, but don't try doing this in the second week. I'm only speedrunning this because I need a catchy title. You should only start doing this when you think you know enough words to figure out the meaning of another word without having to look it up. Just to give you an example, on this first page, I know that this word means green and that this word means brown, but I don't know this word that comes after them. However, I do know that in this paragraph, he has been describing himself and his sister. He even tells us he has good legs. And since he already mentioned their hair color, we can only assume that he's talking about their eyes. And we can confirm this when he later mentions that they're the same as his parents, meaning that he's talking about something that has to be passed down genetically, like eye color. I know that I'm being verbose, but this is how I snowball my vocabulary in a new language. Once you can do this, your language learning becomes self-sustaining and no longer feels like homework. But we are not there yet, so let's keep grinding. My third week consisted of the exact same things. For most people, this is where burnout starts to happen, and I was no exception. This is perfectly normal. Unless you're taking a class, this is just self-assigned homework for no reason. There's no trick to get through this other than just forcing yourself to. But if you can just get through this week, you'll be happy to find more of the exact same hurdles in the next week. I'm not getting paid for this, man. Why would I lie to you? I was at the point where I had a personal beef with Charlemagne because I feel like this would be a lot easier if he was a more present father. Anyways, after hiking through the muddy and scarred terrain of no man's land for 5 days, I finally made it to the German trenches. That's right, compound words. And just like the real German trenches, the best way to handle this is, in my opinion, with the shotgun method. Keep in mind though that this may not work for everyone. Take a word, sound it out, it's gonna be bad, don't worry about that, and then make a couple of guesses based on the sound and vibes alone. It's better to not overthink the hard parts of a language. The native speakers don't. You can even use this logic with gender nouns. As a native Spanish speaker with French as a semi-second language, I didn't even realize that these languages were gendered until I studied Italian. Again, unless you have a test or something, I would say to avoid trying to memorize all the rules because you'll just go insane when they're broken in the next sentence. I spent a good portion of this week just reading and rereading several pages of the book. After reading about 2 chapters, I understood the story but only half the words. In my opinion, that's progress and I'll take it. In the 4th week, I finally started understanding spoken German. This was my biggest accomplishment of the month and I was glad because it meant that my learning was about to get a lot faster. It no longer felt like a chore to listen to German podcasts. Now every 5 minutes I was having a little victory lap whenever I understood anything. I watched so much German content that I started getting recommended German content, and a lot of them were these Learn German with SpongeBob videos, which were very effective for some reason.
Wo ist mein Getränk?
Welches Getränk?
Mein Getränk! Meine Diät-Cola! Sag bloß nicht, du hast mein Getränk vergessen!
In hindsight, a children's cartoon should have probably been my first step. It was such a big help that I finished reading the first story of my book. I spent the last few days of the month rereading until I was confident I understood every word. So yeah, that's how much German I learned in 1 month. Thank you for watching. Alright, let's talk about actually speaking a language. It's something that I actively struggle with, admittedly because I don't put in any effort. The only reason that I learned Italian as a teenager was because I thought it would look good on a resume. And maybe it's because I became an adult a year before the pandemic hit, but this has never helped me get a job. Unless you travel overseas a lot or work a very specific job, there's no real advantage in knowing more than 2 languages. The only language that has helped me is Spanish, and that's because I live in Houston. So keep in mind that unless you have someone that you can consistently speak with in this language, this might take you a while. As a matter of fact, the only time I've had to speak a language other than English or Spanish was this June. The day before Germany played their first World Cup match here in Houston, one of my coworkers noticed that a waiter we had befriended was struggling to understand a group of Germans and called me over. Now, I have never seen a German that can't speak English, but I didn't think too much about it. Again, I still suck at speaking the language, but I had been learning for 4 months at this point. And I understood that the guy was asking about the metro, so I figured why not give it a shot. So I go up to this guy and trying my best, I say, Entschuldigung, ich spreche ein bisschen Deutsch. Kann ich Ihnen helfen? And I thought that was at least understandable. But the dude just looks at me with the SS officer stare and starts speaking perfect English. Like, what was the point? Fuck you, dude! Anyways, to get better at speaking a language, there's only 2 tips that I got that actually worked for me. The first is once again the shotgun method. Just try saying something fast after sounding it out. It'll help with a few of the words.
Mit freundlichen Grüßen.
Mit freundlichs. We're not doing that.
For the second piece of advice, you're gonna have to hear me out a little bit. Like, seriously, please let me explain myself first. You're gonna have to get a little racist. Look, you were trying to mimic, not mock, and the best way to do this is to just pick a dialect and stick to it. Take, for example, the Spanish phrase, me jalo una paja. If you're not a native Spanish speaker, that might be a little hard for you to pronounce.
Me jalo una paja.
But now pretend there's a proximity sensor on the top row and the bottom row of your teeth. And if these sensors get too close to each other, they will trigger all nuclear warheads in the world. And now try saying the same phrase. Congratulations, you are now Puerto Rican.
Me jalo una paja, me jalo una paja.
In my experience, trying to mimic a form of speech is much easier than trying to pronounce everything correctly. Unfortunately, I quickly realized that this isn't possible with German.
Ja, mei, grüß dich. Ich bin der SpongeBob.
So I'm going to be stuck here for a while. So how much of a language did I learn in 1 month? Like the bottom of A2 if we're being honest.